Jake is joined by co-host Blake Fulmer. Jake, what do you have for us today?
Today we will be looking at big tech monopolies, the blue origin, and media bias.
Alrighty, let's get right into it.
Yes. So we'll go ahead and start off with big tech monopolies. So what do we know about that?
Big tech monopoly. So, of course, monopoly, in a basic sense, is kind of when you come to really dominate the market in one category or another. Not too long ago we saw this with the company that's now AT&T, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, which actually has quite a history. If you look back, it's founded by Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. So a lot of interesting history there. But later, they expanded quite a bit, and of course had something of a monopoly on telephone. And so, due to things we call antitrust laws, which are designed to kind of break up monopolies, the idea being that monopolies make it too difficult to compete with them, and that in order to kind of foster, free trade and, free market and, to a lesser degree, give the little guy a chance, that's why antitrust laws are introduced. Now that of course was introduced, and they had AT&T split up into smaller companies, which were known as baby bells. So people who've been around for the past 50 years, they may know what's now AT&T used to be divided up. Of course, in our area it would be Southwestern Bell, and then different areas would be Pacific Bell, and of course different areas had their respective divisions of Bell, which was all tied to originally the AT&T or American Telephone and Telegraph something company. So you have a similar thing today, and this is going to be no surprise, once we point it out. Of course, Google, you could say they have something of a monopoly, certainly on search. And recently, an article came out from the New York Times. You might check it out. That covers a little bit of this, but you don't want to, I wouldn't bother with it. We cover all the important parts right here. So Google essentially, search is mainly what they have, a web search is what they have a monopoly on. So of course in their products they have internet browsers such as Google Chrome, which is very popular, and of course on that, of course the default search engine is their search engine, Google. Google also pays Apple to be the default search engine on iPhones.
Right.
And Google also owns Android, so it's the default search engine on Android phones as well.
Yeah.
So you could say they have something of a monopoly on web search. And the other company mentioned here is Meta, and perhaps to a lesser degree here, but increasingly so. Meta, the company that used to be known as Facebook, they changed the name, and fittingly so, because they expanded a great deal. It isn't merely Facebook now. They, of course, bought out WhatsApp, and they bought out Instagram, a couple of other media platforms, and so they've expanded. So some would say, to the point of having a monopoly, Zuckerberg wouldn't say, he pushes back and says, we still have plenty of competition from apps like TikTok, which I know we've covered that a little bit recently. How's TikTok doing? Is that still something that you're able to access, or what?
Yeah, it seems like that the state of TikTok is very similar to where it was before the executive order, the extension that was made from Trump. And so TikTok is still around, but I believe we're still at the point where you're not able to download it if you don't have it already installed.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like we're still at that status with TikTok.
Mm-hmm. So essentially here, and for some time, there's been considerable debate on antitrust laws. Exactly how much should we do to break up monopolies when they come around, okay? Because, of course, having a monopoly, that's not easy. And that takes a great deal of work and effort on the part of the companies, and it takes a long time to develop those. And so oftentimes the products that they have to offer, they are considerable. Something of a gold standard, but on the other hand, you have to wonder if, these antitrust laws were introduced, broke up Google, and that would allow more competition to come in. If there were more competition, one, the competition might better, and two, the competition might also push companies like Google to put forth better products to actually compete. So it's kind of an interesting debate there. On one hand, it's like, well, they kind of built themselves up to this point. I mean, it didn't just Google didn't immediately just become as big as it is. So on one hand,
Right.
it's like, oh, yeah, they've got a monopoly, maybe so. They almost have a monopoly. Uh, they've earned it, let them have that. And for the time being, Google's products, for the most part, are pretty satisfactory. On the other hand, some might not be so satisfied about it. What's your take on antitrust laws, Jake?
Well, they're definitely helpful as far
Mhm.
as preventing.
Well, helpful in some cases.
Yeah,
I'd wager to say that oftentimes they're not.
really.
In fact, in recent times, um, I don't know. Some are. You have to be kind of wary on the wording of it, but I think I would err on the less likely side. If it's a question, maybe like absolutely with Meta. Not really sure that they have. I mean, Dr. Booker, of course, he has a vested interest in it. It's his company, but he does bring up a good point. At least companies like Meta, there are a lot of other social media platforms like TikTok, for example, and they have quite a lot of users. So, has a point when he says that they have no shortage of competition. So, when it comes to Meta, I probably wouldn't consider that a monopoly, and I don't see real issues with the product offerings. And similarly with Google, I'd be more inclined, to support antitrust regarding Google. I think that's a bit larger scale, but even then, I'd be wary of it.
So you don't think that Google is really a monopoly?
I think they are something of one, but I think just more speaking on the broader discussion of antitrust laws. Should we have them, or if we do, to what degree should we have them? Should we allow some of that to happen? Yeah, I think so. And I think we should let them grow.
So I think kind of what your idea is that you know a company doesn't become successful overnight, and
Right.
so if they become successful, they should be able to. They should be able to, be
Right. Now,
that they
obviously,
shouldn't be cut back. I guess is what I'm
if
getting
things got
at.
really out of
Yeah.
hand, and maybe there are things with Google. I don't claim to be a Google expert, so maybe it really is out of hand. There's just something that I'm not seeing. But I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced that this would be warranted.
Well, and as far as Google goes, I mean, we all use it so much. I mean,
Right.
you just have any sort of conversation and something comes up that you don't know. What's the first thing that you do? You say, well, why don't you just Google it? Google has really just become part of our language at this point. We just use it on a daily
Right, and
basis.
it hasn't. It's become used so widely that even if you're not necessarily using their search engine, you still refer to it as Google. And I think that that was intentional. They kind of came up with it. That was something easy for people to latch onto.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing that people are calling other search engines. It's like obviously Google, would say that they have a better search engine, but they don't have a problem with you calling web search in general Googling it, right? Because it gives them more publicity, kind of like what P.T. Barnum once said: any publicity is good publicity.
Which,
right, that just sort of puts their name out there.
yeah, I don't know that all
I wouldn't
publicity
totally
is
agree
good.
I wouldn't totally agree with him, but there's something to that.
Yes.
I mean, he was certainly successful with that. Doing anything he could just to put his name out there to get himself in the papers.
If it's memorable, why don't go ahead and go with it?
Uh-huh.
If it's something that's very catchy, obviously a lot of commercials they use that, and
right, and
the most
P.T. Barnum,
successful
he knew
commercials,
publicity, he knew marketing. I mean, his show was regarded as the greatest show on earth. Of course, there's a movie based on that, The Greatest Show on Earth, and a more recent one, The Greatest Showman, which you may be familiar with. If you didn't know, that's actually based on The Greatest Showman himself, P.T. Phineas Taylor Barnum.
Yeah, I mean I don't think that Google's necessarily a monopoly when we look at it in the sense of is it something that's taken over all other competition? Yes, but is it taking over all a competition in a dangerous way? I don't think it really.
I don't know that they are.
Yeah, it's not
right.
because we all use it, and I feel like that if Google was minimized in some way, we would all have bad effects. It would badly affect all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as are antitrust laws a good thing, I think they are, but maybe not as strong as they are right now. They should be scaled back a little bit from their current
I'd agree
state.
with that.
So I understand with that.
Right, and it's interesting that you mentioned P.T. Barnum, because of course he had what was known as the greatest show on earth. Of course, it was a traveling circus, and that was a major attraction at the time. It was huge, and of course that didn't happen overnight, and it's not as if P.T. Barnum. It's not as if he came from a particularly privileged background. Sort of built that up, and one might say. And of course, anyone, you don't have to be an expert on this. You've seen, the movie. It was sort of regarded in the same way. One might have said that, in the realm of circuses, you could maybe begin to say that P.T. Barnum had something of a monopoly.
Yeah, and so we can look at previous companies that have turned almost monopoly style, and
right. And of course, his
reference.
company still exists. I believe it's changed names several times. It continued to use his name. You can look that up. I believe they call it Ringling Brothers Circus, something like that now, but it still exists.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and Google that right now. Oh,
right.
Look at that.
Oh my gosh,
wow.
I can't believe we did it.
We couldn't go a whole conversation without saying Google it.
Right.
See? I mean, it just proves our point.
Right, they didn't Bing it, they didn't Yahoo it, they Googled it. I mean, even if they used one of those other search engines, they still called it Google it.
Probably
did.
It
has a distinct ring to it. And of course, those other ones have distinct names. Of course, Yahoo, maybe you'll remember the old Yahoo logo. It was in all capital letters. And that wasn't purely a design decision. It was actually an acronym originally, which was essentially a way of describing web search. If you know what that is, love to hear it. Put it down in the comments below, okay? And 3, 2, 1, we're going to tell you what it is. The acronym stood for Yet Another Hierarchical Officious Oracle. A little bit of information, history of web search, if you didn't know that.
And so, going back over to Google, I wonder if whoever came up with the name for it, because I guess we don't really know who came up with the idea to call it Google. I wonder how much credit they're really given for advertising it. I mean, think about it. The name is really what sets it apart.
They did something distinct, and you saw with search engines before Google. And I actually remember a little bit of this, and this may have been, a bit behind it. They've grown up. I attended a relatively small private school. The computers that we had there, they ran Windows XP, and whenever we could access, different educational websites, it would be through Internet Explorer. They had different sites. Of course, you remember the old setup up in the toolbar. They'd have all the different search engines, and before Google appeared on there, that's what it was Bing and Yahoo, namely. I remember mainly using Yahoo, but Yahoo and Bing both, of course, being tied to Microsoft and Microsoft News. It was very soon that they bought Bing out. But sort of their approach was a directory of the internet. You could search things by keyword, but their homepage was a directory. You would have a news page, you would have sports, lifestyle, all of these different things that they would cover on their homepage. And Google just took a whole different approach. They had a page with a search bar. That's it.
Yeah.
So, similar to the restaurants that are well known that you go into that have a very simple menu.
Yeah.
It's more difficult to mess those things up. And so I think perhaps it's a similar thing with these. And well, it's interesting. I say that, but it's interesting to see kind of trends in that. Up until very recently, that's what Google was a search bar. Maybe you see the Google kind of graphic on there. But now they actually do have a new page. If you go onto Google today, you scroll down, it resembles other search engines, and that for a long time wasn't the case. So are we seeing a change? Quite possibly. I don't know what your preferences are in search. Frankly, even though at times for certain things Google turned out to be a more powerful search engine, but I personally preferred the approach of Bing, Yahoo, where they had more right on their homepage. There was always an appeal to that. What about you? Jay, as far as that goes, what are you partial to? Just the simple search bar alone, or?
I think so.
Uh huh.
I think sometimes when it pops up something like remember that it's this day or that it's this day. Like recently,
Right.
this past Tuesday we had Earth Day, and so if it like pops up a picture of like a globe or something, I think that's really nice to have. It reminds you of
Yeah.
what day it is. I mean, I know that you have calendars and you
Right.
can look at that, but it's still really nice to
It is.
just have a little picture icon.
That's nice, but you like very basic sort of Google sketches, so I'm guessing you're maybe not the biggest fan of Google recently expanding that page where they actually do feature news stories and different things on the homepage.
I think it's helpful, but it should be like you click a button and then it pops up all of that. So I think it's
And
good
it's
to
somewhat
have.
balanced, because
Yeah.
tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe at least on desktop, if you visit their page now, that main page, it looks just like Google with the search bar, maybe the sketch, but it's like scroll down for more news or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's at least not terribly visually cluttered. So that is one thing that at least visually still sets them apart from the others.
Yeah, it's definitely good. You can find all sorts of different information and
It is beneficial,
yeah.
but there have been some recent suggestions that, oh, well, search, that's been kind of the going thing for some time, right? If you want to come up with something, you Google it, and we still say it. But there's been a suggestion that artificial intelligence will take over search, that people are going to be shifting over to things like, say, ChatGPT, and now they have AI engines that they're specifically the future of search. Like one I've run across, Perplexity AI, is supposed to be, they call themselves, I believe, the future of search, something like that, where you enter key terms. And it's not as polished a process. It takes a little bit more time, and if you look at the energy, like wattage wise, it takes a little more energy to run a search on something like, or something comparable to a search through artificial intelligence, say ChatGPT or something. Um, but I think there is some merit to that people are shifting over to that. I don't know at this point how reliable that information is. I can't say.
Yeah.
I use those frequently, but it's interesting to see. And one thing I think that is likely, of course, Google is dipping their foot a little bit into artificial intelligence. Now, if you run a search, many things they provide the AI overview through Google Gemini.
Yeah. So AI is starting to become incorporated with the search engines,
Right.
and eventually, once it becomes more accurate, it might just be embedded in everything. And so
Right.
it's kind of an interesting point. Going on to our next subject, we've got the Blue Origin. So
Blue Origin.
Blue Origin. What's that all about?
Blue Origin. Well, the origin of the color blue, I don't know. No, the Blue Origin, I believe it was a recent space expedition of sorts, wasn't it?
Yes. So that was kind of a recent news event. We were
Mhm.
talking a little bit about news that you can find off of Google and updated information. So that's a recent news story that happened.
Yeah, I recall just seeing some headlines about that. What exactly was so notable about it?
Well, there was, I guess you could say some celebrities or, popular news anchors that were all going to space for a day,
Right, and there's one thing they all had in common.
which is the fact that they had never been to space.
Well, also that they're an all-female crew.
Yes.
So at least that's what most of the headlines said.
Yeah.
Is that, of course, it's historic because it's the first all-female crew to go to space.
And none of them were really astronauts.
Right.
I mean, there was probably one.
And so that's quite
probably
the
one aboard,
accomplishment. That's quite the accomplishment. Really, regardless of what you think, it wasn't, admittedly, not the most extensive space expedition, but you can take three women that have never been astronauts, never been on expeditions of this sort, and man it totally from the ground. I believe that's quite the accomplishment.
Yes. Now, with that being said, there is, however, a little bit of controversy.
Right, they didn't go quite that far, did they?
They did not, and a lot of the headlines leading up to it, like I saw on CBS, this advertisement kept popping up. It was like, Gail goes to space in 3 days and 2
Right.
days, and however many days leading up to it. And so it really caught people's attention. They made a really big deal out of this. But now there's a lot of controversy behind, did they just go up a few hundred feet into the air? Did they really go to space? If they did, how far up did they go? There's some people who suggest that it was all kind of for show and not necessarily as real as what we think it is.
Right.
I mean, obviously they took off from the ground. There's no doubt about that because we all saw that live.
Right, they did, and I believe you had a picture of it a while ago of the actual takeoff.
Yes, I think we did. Let's see where.
Now that's certainly been documented.
Right here.
I believe we saw a picture of that a while ago, and it was run recently, an issue of USA Today.
Not sure how well you guys can see that.
But that is a picture of the takeoff.
Yeah, there we go. I think
so
anybody can see that
perhaps
pretty well.
there be those who dispute it, but of course there are still those who dispute the moon landing, say that was staged, that it never actually happened. So.
And then here is kind of the USA Today front headline right there. So there you can see Katy Perry getting off of the Blue Origin capsule.
And from what I've heard, it was a very dramatic landing. It was very short. They weren't in space for very long.
Yeah.
They came down. Katy Perry in particular, I think, came down and kissed the ground as if she hadn't been home in a year.
Even though it had just been a couple hours at most.
Right, a couple hours.
It was the same day that they came back, so. So again, it lifted off on April 14th, but they came back not too long afterwards. So it was an all-female crew, and it took off on April 14th. And again, it was just a few hours, but a lot of controversy behind, did they really go to space, or did they just kind of go up a little bit in the sky? In fact, there's some people who have suggested, well, they've got some evidence as to why they're pretty sure that they didn't go up into space.
Yeah.
We're not really going to get into all the details of that.
So what do you think? Did they actually go to space or not?
I'm going to say probably not, based on what I think.
Okay.
But, this actually came up in a conversation that we were both in earlier today.
Right.
And if you're listening to this and you were in that conversation, you know what our evidence is. If you weren't, let's just say that we're not really going to talk about it.
And I believe you also mentioned this previously, that if they did go to space, it can't have been far, right? Because they were back very soon, at the very least. Okay?
Yes.
And there's a number of other evidence contributing to that.
Yeah. So that was one thing that took place. Now I guess going on to media bias. So talking about that, I think you know that the media is biased. Every media that we hear is biased.
No.
Really? You didn't know that?
Really?
Really? Yeah. Yeah, it is biased. Every media source. Now there are some that are typically very minimal bias, like obviously probably the first three that you think of are NBC News, ABC News, and CBS News.
Right. And we've talked about that a bit before on this channel, right, because obviously some degree of bias is inherent.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously it's always to varying degrees. When you talk about things being unbiased, of course, yes, it means relatively unbiased is actually what they mean, and you can't really be unbiased because some degree of it is always inherent, but probably a considerable degree. But this sort of places those on a scale.
Yeah. In fact, let's go ahead and if we want to go ahead and just kind of show that up a little bit closer. Mm-hmm. So.
Right, a scale ranging from, of course, on the left-hand side, left-leaning sources, on the right-hand side, right-leaning sources. Okay.
Get that a little bit closer.
What would be considered moderate ones towards the center.
Yeah, so you can see again that we've got NBC, ABC, and CBS is towards the center, and it says mainstream minimal bias. And so that's kind of what we were mentioning. Those are the ones that you think of as having the least amount of bias. But we also have the Washington Post, NPR, BBC, PBS, the New York Times, and then of course the Associated Press. A lot of those are just a few of them to list off.
Right, I would certainly consider those, mainstream only in the sense to the main channels. Of course the big three, NBC, ABC, and CBS, have been regarded that way for a long time, and later on we've gotten public media, which we talked about recently, which may be cut sometime soon. We'll see. But there's
Yeah.
NPR, National Public Radio, PBS, Public Broadcasting Service. Those mainstream, in the sense that those are the main channels. But um, they often have the, I don't know, facade, would you say, of being relatively unbiased?
Yeah.
And I don't know that in practice that's really true. And many of them, I mean, some of this is fair. I don't know, the extremes. Yeah, it's probably fair. It's easier to place, because the bias is more apparent. But as far as the ones that they place towards the center, I don't know that I would agree with it. In certain ones, I wouldn't necessarily endorse the placements on this particular chart.
Yeah, well, and it's important to realize that all those ones that we mentioned in the center are just kind of equally, at least according to this chart, are pretty equal. But I think what's interesting is that a lot of these news channels, now keep in mind, this was updated in 2016.
Yeah.
I feel like that there's been a few changes in the last 9 years. Something that I will throw out there is NBC has been directed more towards younger people, and then CBS has been directed more towards older people.
Interesting.
And then ABC is kind of middle aged. Now, again, that was kind of the original purpose of those three, but do we really see that today? I think a little bit.
Perhaps. They maintain that to some degree.
Yeah.
And another interesting question, if we step back a little bit, on something of a side note, we mentioned how, of course, this ranges from left to right, respectively, left being liberal and right being conservative. Now, why do we get those? Why are liberal and conservative associated with being on the left and the right? Is that abstract? Are they actually tied to those directions, left and right? Well, not actually. It's based on a historical event. So the French Revolution, you had, of course, the revolutionaries who are against, they wanted to overthrow the monarchy, or beheading the monarchs and everything. And, and then on the other side, you have the monarchists. And, their government, where they actually sat, where much of this happened, the monarchists sat on the right, in this case, the conservatives, and on the left side were the revolutionaries, or the liberals. So that's where those terms originate from, is the French Revolution.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that that's how those had originated from.
Right, and they have been around quite as long as what some people might think. We haven't had them for just all of time, but they've been around for a while since the French Revolution, which some time has passed since then.
So when we look back at this chart, do you think there's been some changes since 2016 to this chart?
Some changes, yes. Is this chart from 2016?
It's around 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a rough estimate. I'm pretty sure it is.
Considerable changes, and I would say probably just based on sort of political events and election cycles.
That can
I'd be willing to say that they've moderated a bit.
You think a lot of these have moderated?
Yeah, what would you say?
In terms of...
Would you say the opposite? Do you think they've, rather than moderated or more doubled down, they're going farther away?
I think some of the ones that we have, if we just look at let's just start with the conservative side. I think The Hill, the National Review, and Fox News, I think some of those in the last 9 years have gone just a little bit further to the right.
Really?
We do know, I will take Fox News, for example. There has been several employees that have been let go because they've actually gone a little bit too conservative, which there's two different arguments you can make with that. Okay, one argument is that the news anchors have become more conservative, therefore the channel is more conservative. Or you can make the argument that because the news channels have let those people go, they're becoming more moderate by letting go of people who are turning them more right.
Right, and that's what my argument would be on Fox. Specifically, is that it seems that many of the most conservative hosts on Fox were let go for one reason or another, whether coincidence or not. We really didn't receive a whole lot of information on that. They've gone on to start their new shows, and I think if you kind of compare and contrast, they're relatively more conservative on what they were on Fox. And I think that's a similar thing. Of course, Fox, no surprise, being on the conservative side, moderate conservative. Oh shoot. Yeah. So as far as that goes, I would say that on either end, of course, moderating means moving towards the centers. So that means different things. On
Yeah.
the left and the right. But I think things have moderated um, considerably. I think really, I noticed that sooner for Fox, I think they've been laying off some hosts for some time now. My observation was that there were more conservative ones. They were moderating quite a bit, moving in towards the left, and
Yeah.
maybe a bit slower on the
Yeah.
other end. But I'd wager to say the ones on the left are also moderating, and because it's largely what you saw. I mean, I think it's fair to say that you compare Trump's policy in his first term and the things that he ran on his second term. I think it's fair to say that he moderated a great deal to be elected.
So part of it might also have to do with, is the president moderating? Again, as you said with Trump. So if Trump
Right.
is moderating, if our leader is moderating from
Right.
their political party, will that also help the media in order to moderate with them? So the question is, does the commander in chief have an influence over how biased our media is?
Well, I'd say almost certainly.
Yeah, there has to be a little bit, but how much of an influence?
I'd say pretty considerable influence.
Yeah.
Considerable influence.
I
And
mean,
it depends. One thing.
If you include social media in it,
Right.
then
One
it would
thing.
certainly be.
One thing that you have to consider, of course, we've already mentioned, is that the sort of the big three, and to some degree also with the public media, you see with NPR, PBS, but you say you look at the big three. If they tend to go to one side. Of course, they tend to be left leaning, and of course, and they don't necessarily change. They maintain certain interests. All right, relatively, you can recognize, a piece of journalism from each of them, and you'd say that I think that also has a role in it um, as far as where the interest lies in the in the legacy media, as it's often called. You know, in other words, these channels have existed for some time. Where does their interest lie?
And so if we look at, so we looked at a lot of the ones towards the center and talked about if they're going to moderate. Let's look at the far left.
Right. So
Okay.
that's something worth noting. Of course, the president has influence on it, but the other people have, more influence. Which, of course, because they own the channel, it's going to trump any influence from the president. No pun intended.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense?
Yes, and so we've got addicting info, natural news, and then U.S. uncut. Those are some of the ones that are on the extreme left of things.
Yeah.
And in fact, it even says on this chart that you should not even look at those, really.
Right,
It even
which, by the
mentions
way,
those.
that's not specifically the left. It has either extreme on the far in the margins of this page.
Yeah.
It refers to those both as utter garbage conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and those that we just mentioned for the left, it says liberal utter garbage conspiracy
Right.
theories. Now let's look at the conservative utter garbage conspiracy theories. We've got the Red State, the Daily Caller. We've also got Brett Bart here.
Breitbart.
Or Brett. Yeah, it's a little bit small. I'm having
Right.
trouble reading this here. And then InfoWars. Now, InfoWars is kind of in an interesting spot.
Right.
They have a lawsuit right now that's against
Right.
them.
InfoWars, of course, that's Alex Jones' channel, correct?
Yes, and there's quite a bit of controversy, obviously, to the
Right.
point of
And
lawsuit.
essentially, that places him under a conspiracy theory as well. That's exactly what he's known for, isn't it?
Yes, and so one has to look at that and say, is it really a bad thing what he's doing, or is he just, giving out what his opinion is, and everybody watching would already know that?
Right. I mean, some say, of course, there's a great deal of reason to have skepticism. You want to have a healthy bit of skepticism when it comes to conspiracy theories. But then on the other hand, we've talked about this before. We've had an entire episode, I believe, dedicated to conspiracy theories during our Snow Day series.
Yes.
Where we talked about a lot of those, and many of them actually turned out to be true. In fact, some have even said the difference between a historical event and a conspiracy theory is a couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, I mean,
So.
I guess we have to look at that.
Right, and in certain chaotic times, it's easy to see where why a person might say that.
Yeah.
So, you have that. Well, what else are we looking at, kind of as we pan across this chart? Some of the notable takeaways from it.
Well, I think we can clearly see what the differences are within this chart. Now we'll go ahead and look individually at each of these different media ones here.
Okay.
So first, starting off with, so that's what we know about the Hill. Now
Right.
just going ahead and looking at the National. Did you hear that?
Oh.
It sounded like
What
somebody was
happened?
knocking at the door.
Oh. Well, probably there's someone at the door then. Let's go.
Yes.
It might be a guest.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and see who's at the door. Right. Oh, look, right over there.
Oh.
Probably thought that we weren't there. Okay.
How do you do, sir?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Just go right ahead and we'll have you sign this form right here.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Fill it out. Be sure to put down your contact information, and we'll get back to you on it.
Yeah. So we'll just go ahead and stand out here for just a moment. We'll be right back in there momentarily. I'm sure things will be fine while we're out there.
You have a nice day, sir. Bye-bye. Well, this seems like a nice fella.
Yeah.
We'll have him on the podcast here shortly. Sorry for the interruption, folks.
Yes.
That was a prospective guest on the podcast, so stay tuned for upcoming special guests. I think you all will enjoy this one.
Yeah, and something else that we're going to be doing very soon is a short film. Isn't that really great?
Yeah,
that
it
we're gonna
is.
be
I can't wait.
doing that. Sure was hot out there. Had to replenish here.
A little Gatorade.
Yep. Tasted a little bit funny to you.
It did.
Maybe we'll have a little bit more. Maybe that'll take it home.
Yeah, I've had it in a while. I don't remember what it tastes like. You have a Gatorade very often?
I mean, about as often as you can have it, I guess. I think I'm gonna go get some water.
Yeah,
That
me
was really
too.
I'm gonna go ahead and get some water after that.
Oh, boy.
I'm having trouble seeing.
Get out of here.